Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining UKAD's Clean Sport Connect webinar series. I'm Jane Rumble, the Chief Exec at UK Anti-Doping, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's session. Please note the session's being recorded. So today, we're focusing on reporting doping concerns and our Protect Your Sport initiative. So it's a great opportunity to learn more about Protect Your Sport, and also a really timely reminder to everyone that no matter how small the information may seem, it's important that you or others share your concerns about potential doping, as this can make all the difference in helping to keep sport clean. The session's being led by our in-house expert, intelligence analyst James Flanagan, and we also warmly welcome Dr. Laurie Patterson, who's a senior lecturer in sport and exercise psychology with the School of Sport at Leeds Beckett University. Laurie initially trained as a sport and exercise scientist, and on completing their master's degree in 2008, became involved in anti-doping research. And their main interest is in investigating anti-doping behaviour among athletes and ASP to inform effective anti-doping practices, programmes and policy. Delighted that Laurie could join us. At the end of the presentations, Emma Fallows, our Head of Communications, will host a Q&A session with our speakers. So please do, if you have questions, submit them throughout the presentations via the Q&A function, and our speakers will do their very best to answer your questions at the end of their presentations. So let me hand over to James to take it from here. Enjoy the session.
Thank you, Jane. Just going to start this presentation now. So I will skip the formalities, as Jane has so kindly introduced the two of us. As Jane has mentioned, I am James Flanagan, part of our intelligence and investigations team here. My role is as an intelligence analyst, and I'm delighted to be joined by Laurie Patterson from Leeds Beckett University, who's going to present on some of the research behind Protect Your Sport, which helped its launch and helps sort of shape the way that it looks at present. So UKAD has received information to inform its testing throughout its existence, and we have a dedicated intelligence team, which I am part of, who processes, makes decisions and disseminates information that we receive to inform the wider organisation. Since UKAD's inception, 31% of all of our anti-doping rule violations have been intelligence-led. But since the introduction of Protect Your Sport, the rate of intelligence-led anti-doping rule violations is now at 44%. Now, this shows the value that utilising intelligence and offering a route for people to send us information and blow the whistle is really, really important to us. I'm now going to run through a brief timeline of Protect Your Sport over the years. And then following this, Dr. Laurie Patterson is going to go into more of the barriers, which I will briefly touch on as part of this timeline. So prior to 2020, before the launch of Protect Your Sport, UKAD used to run various different campaigns, including Report Doping in Sport and others, targeted at specific sports. But amongst these campaigns, we sort of lacked cohesiveness, and we did not necessarily get the volume of reports we were after and the quality of reports that we really wanted. I'm afraid I am going to mention COVID, but this is the only time, I promise. COVID came around and put a stop to competitive sports, and as a result, we saw a decline in intelligence reporting. In January 2020, Leeds Beckett University and Dr. Patterson, who will be speaking shortly, published a research paper funded by WADA regarding whistleblowing in sport. This research was focused on athletes and their support personnel, and it was very important to understand how different individual, situational, and cultural factors were deterring a person from coming forward to report a potential violation of the World Anti-Doping Code, which UKAD seeks to enforce. The research identified several barriers for reporting doping, with some of the key being a lack of awareness on how to report, who to report to, where do you go, is it your national governing body, is it your anti-doping agency? Is it WADA? So how and who to report to was quite a big one. Uncertainty over what has been witnessed is enough to report, and concerns over confidentiality and feeling that whistleblowers will not be taken seriously. I'm purely outlining these. I'm sure Dr. Patterson will go into some more detail shortly. Following on from this, we saw how important it was to try and break down these barriers in our own reporting channel. So we took this evidence-based approach to launch our Protect Your Sport campaign in November of 2020. We knew we wanted and needed to encourage more people to come forward to share their concerns about doping in sport, and especially the athletes themselves and those closest to them, such as athlete support personnel, many of who are on this call today. So we thank you for being here and listening to this presentation. So therefore, the tagline of Protect Your Sport is that it takes a team to keep sport clean, just like it takes a team to be successful in the sporting arena, because we simply can't protect sport on our own. We need the input from those who are actually there and see what is going on behind the scenes. And this is where you are really vital in helping us raise awareness so that we can break down the barriers of knowing how to report and who to report doping suspicions to. With Protect Your Sport, we really wanted to highlight the different ways an athlete, coach, or any other person with a suspicion that something isn't right can speak out in confidence so that we can break down those barriers around confidentiality and the concerns a whistleblower may face. There are 3 ways to report any concerns. The first one is through the Protect Your Sport email, which comes directly to our intelligence and investigations team. The anonymous hotline, which is operated by professional trained call handlers at Crime Stoppers. And finally, the anonymous online form, which is also operated by Crime Stoppers. Whilst being anonymous, there are options for the reporter to securely leave their details should they wish, so that us at UKAD can go back to them and ask further questions, which can really help understand the extent of the issue at hand. Although the information will always be passed on anonymously with the aforementioned caveats of providing details if they want to, the initiative encourages people to speak openly as we seek to strike out the stigma around reporting and hit home just how important it is for people to protect their sport from doping cheats. Each and every report we receive is researched and reviewed, and it helps our team gather evidence we need to catch those who cheat in sport. Another barrier that was identified is the uncertainty that what had been witnessed was actually enough to report. Therefore, the message from Protect Your Sport is that no matter how big or small, each piece of information can be the missing puzzle piece to help us build an intelligent picture that we can act on and catch those who cheat. You never know how big or small that information is, and that it might just be that final piece of a puzzle that we're already trying to look at the moment. So no matter how small, come forward with the information. In 2020, in conjunction with Protect Your Sport, UKAD also launched the whistleblower policy, which outlines the protections for anyone sharing information about doping. And this policy goes hand in hand with the 2021 anti-doping code by WADA for protecting people who report doping in sport. And this is continually amended when the code itself is updated. So on the 1st of January of 2021, an amended version of the WADA code came into effect with a brand new anti-doping rule violation, Article 2.11. And this article relates to acts by an athlete or other person to discourage or retaliate against reporting to authorities. So this gives protection for people who want to come to UK anti-doping with information. And this ADRV carries up to a lifetime ban from sport, and it applies to anyone who attempts to threaten or intimidate someone into not reporting doping or for retaliating against another person for doing so. Moving on in 2023, so this year, we're continually looking to improve Protect Your Sport as a channel. We've seen increased numbers of reports each year. And while it's going really well, we know that we can make it better. So together with our research and innovation team, we've launched the project and are looking to really improve how Protect Your Sport will work and look in the future. We're working on what that means for our reporting service, and we'll be excited to share and see what changes this work brings out in the future. I'm now going to hand over to Dr. Laurie Patterson, who will go into more of the finer detail around the barriers that I've touched upon so far and how these assisted as we developed our Protect Your Sport channel so far.
Okay, can you hear me okay, James?
Yeah.
Okay, right. Thank you so much. It's really exciting for me to be here on behalf of our research team at Leeds Beckett. There's nothing better as a researcher than obviously seeing your work have impact. So it's really exciting things that you've been doing at UKAD, and we are excited to see where you're going with it in the future. So thank you for the invitation to be part of the talk today. The specific project referred to is what I'll be in particular. As James rightly said, it was funded by the World Anti-Doping Agency. It was actually back in 2016 when we began that work. So if you think back to what was happening around that time, there was this big movement towards intelligence and investigation for anti-doping. It was really coming to the fore, and obviously WADA recognised that and invested resources. They really wanted to underpin the policies that they were bringing out and the infrastructure to really make sure that that was evidence informed, and also obviously understanding the behaviour of reporting. The more that we do that, the more we can influence that. So obviously at that time, there were platforms already in place for reporting, but they weren't necessarily the research that we undertook and that others have undertaken in a similar vein was to ensure that the platforms were actually being used and were being used for the purpose that they were set up for. So I'm going to talk very specifically about just two phases of this work, and they were interview and survey phases. So if we can just move on to the next slide, please, James. With athletes and coaches from two countries. So our particular research was based in the US and the UK. We interviewed coaches and athletes, including whistleblowers. So we had people with experience of using report processes and having to go through that whole process of being a reporter and what that really means. When we'd done that, so the interviews were kind of an exploratory investigation, we created a survey which we launched online. And obviously we were trying to figure out there if some of the experiences and the reporting were seen at large. So we're going to be seen in larger groups of individuals. So we had 301 athletes and 139 coaches complete the online survey. And I just want to point out, because I suppose this frames the whole way that I'm presenting the data today, I am amalgamating the data from the interviews and the surveys into one, and I'm going to do it based on this framework that you're looking at right now. So this is the COM-B model. It's a behavioural science tool. And the reason that we like it influence our motivation and opportunity are all said to be influential in affecting our behaviour. And we will only act if those three pieces of the puzzle come together to support the behaviour in question. In this sense, we're talking about reporting behaviour. So we need to have the capability to report. That normally comes down to knowledge and skill. We have to have the motivation, and that can be our kind of deliberate, rational thinking and our planned behaviour, but it also comes down to our automatic impulses, our emotions. And then lastly, our opportunity. The thing that we really liked about this was the fact that it has two elements. So it has environmental context and resource, which is essentially the support we've got available to us. Are there platforms? Are there counsellors, and so on and so forth? And also the social opportunity, which is essentially what are the people around us reinforcing, what are they encouraging, and what do we think is kind of normal and accepted behaviour in our contexts. This theory, we've had some good feedback from organisations that we work with in terms of how helpful it is. So because it does simplify quite a complex issue into just these national governing bodies and national anti-doping organisations to perhaps influence what's going on. So that's why we've decided to just use it today and introduce it to you. Thanks, James. So just getting right into the data then, before they largely come down to knowledge and skill. And we had mixed results across the coaches and the athletes on this issue. So coaches who were interviewed generally did seem to know that there were whistleblowers available. And around 2/3 of coaches knew how to report and what to report in terms of doping. Unfortunately, athletes were consistently how to report, and actually only 1/3 of athletes knew what to report. So there's obviously a lack of capability in general, but athletes in particular might require further support in this area. In addition to a lack of knowledge related to how and what, interviewed coaches and athletes had a lack of understanding of the actual process. So they were not really sure what would happen once they'd report. And that athletes had any safeguards that might be in place for people who report, which as we go on into other areas and influencing factors, we'll find are actually quite important things to consider. Now, obviously that's a little bit negative and doom and gloom. So let's present some positives. At the bottom of the slide here, we've got what we would call our enabling factors. So they're the things that are helping reporting behaviours. So coaches and athletes do know their responsibilities. So they do know that there is an expectation for them to report. Over 3/4 of coaches and athletes said they have the skills and ability to access a platform. So once we made them available, and thought they could do that. And they actually were also really keen to upskill in this area. So there was this desire to become more knowledgeable by engaging in education. And they specifically told us what they might like that education to look like. So they talked about it providing practical help in terms of how and what to report. And also the interviewed coaches and in some successful stories might be quite helpful. And when they said success, sometimes that did mean a sanction resulting from the report, but they also felt that even just knowing that one of their tips might lead to a test happening would feel kind of satisfactory, would be a promoting factor for why they might report again, or what might encourage them to report in the first place, was knowing that it had actually made a difference. Be able to go to the next slide. Sorry, I can't. Yeah, there it is. I don't know if I've got a lag, sorry. So just to bring some of the barriers around capability to life, I just want to show you this quote from someone who has experienced reporting themselves. It shows how hard it can be to establish that what you've seen is worth reporting in the first place. So one of our whistleblowers said, most of the time it's not, I saw this guy inject testosterone, here's a picture and a video recording of, you go, there's everything. It's not black and white like that. That this is really important. So step one is coming to terms with the fact that what you saw was indeed wrong. And we move into the motivational elements of reporting, and this is where it gets quite complicated sometimes. So acting in our favour and enabling reporting behaviour, the survey showed us that the majority of coaches and athletes think that reporting doping, is consistent with their personal beliefs. They think it's the right thing to do. And they actually also see it as their responsibility. So if they're an athlete and a coach in sport, they feel that part of being an athlete in a coaching sport is to report things they see that they don't agree with or that they know violate the rules. And enabling factors were consolidated. So this idea that it's their responsibility and they believe it's the right thing to do was consolidated in the fact that they had a strong intention to go ahead and report should they become aware of the behaviour. So they think it's what they'll do should that ever become relevant. Now, unfortunately, there were some very powerful barriers in the motivational element, and that include the negative consequences that people believe will come for the athlete they report about, the negative consequences that may happen for themselves, including their career prospects and their financial prospects. And mostly, there is also a very strong fear of retaliation. And again, just to bring some of those bullet points to life, we'll take the negative consequences for the athlete being reported on first. This is a really daunting feature of reporting, and it's something that's been found in other research, not just our own. It's all about this potential impact that you could have on someone else's life and how uncomfortably that sits with people. So our whistleblower explains that this can feel like you're betraying someone. You care about this person and you might have actually spent a really long time with this person, even if they're a competitor. You know, you'll have been traveling around the sport at various different events over time, and you do get to know one another. You're not always kind of opponents in the strongest sense of the word. So it's not just black and white. You're a person and you have empathy towards someone else. And in the right-hand quote, I'll just read this one to you. They explain, I don't even want to see them get sanctioned. I just want them not to compete. That's so weird. I mean, I want justice, and I know that means they have to be sanctioned, but human to human, I feel bad. So reporting doesn't make them feel good. And then we move on to the consequences for themselves and their concerns about what might happen for their prospects. One of the athletes explained before whistleblowing, they were thinking that they couldn't do it. They were not going to be able to do it until they essentially left the sport. So they explained, I'm never going to go public with this until I retire because I know it will just sink my career. That was the only thing I was thinking. If anything, I'm just going to have to quit the sport. It made them very paranoid. And this same person, reflecting back on what did happen when they had reported and the aftermath kind of ensued, they didn't necessarily talk about their career and their contract, but they did talk about the fact that they themselves and their reputation was continually being questioned. So they said, I think that's the hardest thing, the constant harassment. I mean, constant, it just gets old. I would say that's been the hardest thing for me because I don't like to fight with anybody, but it's just non-stop having to defend myself. Now, interestingly, they were the lived experiences of someone who had reported, and it's really important to take on board that perspective because the survey data with our coaches and athletes who hadn't necessarily experienced reporting themselves did conflict with those accounts of the negativity. So only a minority of the coaches and athletes in the survey thought about the negative consequences for reporting doping. So if you look at the boxes on the right hand side of this image, the possibility of being negatively labelled was only really a concern for around a fifth of coaches and athletes, and there were similar percentages for concerns about damaging their relationships, but then even less concern was evident for future financial earnings and future career, whereas obviously we'd seen the other side of that from the reporters. So there is conflict there in terms of the perspective of people who haven't actually had to go through this yet versus the people who have the first-hand experience of going through this. And it's important to kind of see that balanced approach. Now, interestingly, we do have some positives on this slide. At the top of the slide in green, there's this optimism from individuals, from coaches and from athletes. They're optimistic that reporting doping in sport will do something, like will have a positive impact, and that's really an enabling factor. So they think that it will protect the rights of athletes by doing that, by coming forward with information. They think it will result in a thorough investigation, and they think it will hopefully, result in sanctions being issued. So the majority, or 3/4 or so, are thinking it's a good thing to report. There are hopefully some benefits of doing so. Now, just picking up on those last points about action being taken and sanctions being imposed, our interviews, including the interviews with our whistleblowers, signalled the importance of knowing that your report is making a difference and having almost kind of check-ins. So the left-hand side, we've got a US coach in particular. They just said that the NARDOs, or whoever is responsible for taking on board the intelligence, needs to explain that intelligence and investigation has resulted in sanctions, it's been effective, or it's resulted in an increased number of tests. Whether that's obviously directly communicating with the reporter, they don't specify, although we do hear that from others. But it's important to just publicly make it known that reporting is making a difference. People who do report do make a difference. There's something that happens. And then on the right-hand side, the UK athlete says, it's important for people to see that reporting can have an influence. It's not just down to the drugs testers and the anti-doping governing bodies. Athletes can have an input. And this was not the only person to kind of explain that it's almost empowering to think that by reporting, you are doing something good. And it gives you the chance to contribute to anti-doping efforts in an active way. And so we'll move on to the final element of the data, which is the opportunity. And this really builds on that idea that we just talked about before, in that organisations need to communicate what happens after a report takes place, because here's pretty much the wish list of coaches and athletes. This is what they reported they would like to see for reporting in the survey. So you can see they want multiple channels, which, as James already explained, UKAD has. There needs to be a step-by-step guide, so that would address the issue of knowing what and how to report. But the majority would also like ongoing communication. So once they've reported, they want to know what's being done and how it's progressing. Going back to kind of, I suppose, the potential experience that our whistleblowers might have, or our reporters might have, we need to implement protection from retaliation. So it's great to see the change to the code in terms of the violation around that having been introduced in 2021. But there's also other elements in terms of not just protection from retaliation, but advice and support in helping the people that come forward with reports handle the aftermath. So legal advice would be helpful, media training would be helpful. And the bottom point there we've got is aftercare. And for some people that involved counselling, and just general kind of welfare support. So I'll illustrate a couple of quotes that talk about this, this was the ongoing communication, the support in particular. Now, quote one here from a UK athlete just shows that there's at least at a minimum a desire to have the report acknowledged. So they say, I think you want to be reassured. Obviously, when they've reported it, I think that athletes should feel like it's been taken on board. They're going to investigate it and you feel like something's been done about it. Athletes that are doing it want to feel like it's not a waste of time. You want to be told, thanks for doing that, we're going to investigate it. And the second quote here is from our whistleblower. And for them, at the time of whistleblowing, there wasn't necessarily the support and the communication and the process in place that there maybe is today. And they talked about the fact that months went by after their report and they didn't hear anything at all. And that was really difficult. Emotionally, it felt very isolating, and they started to really doubt that what they'd done was worth the risk. So they explain, I was so angry and I went into a bit of a spiral. You've just thrown your entire career, or it feels like you're throwing your entire career out of the window, and then you just disappear off the face of the planet. Now, obviously, needing the support and needing the ongoing communication will only become relevant if people come forward and report. To end the insights into our research, I'm just moving on here to one of the most powerful influences on reporting behaviour. It comes up time and time again in various studies. And this relates to social opportunity. So essentially, we're talking about social influence, the people around us and the culture that we experience. Now, on the one hand, on the positives, athletes and coaches who we surveyed said that reporting is probably quite strongly enabled by the people important to them. So the people really close to them. And they feel that people who are important to them would encourage them to report doping and would support their decision once they'd reported doping. But acting as barriers and kind of preventative measures for reporting behaviours, less than half our coaches and athletes were actively being encouraged to report within their sport. And just over a quarter of coaches and athletes felt like the reaction in sport to those who they've seen reported in the past encourages them to report doping. So we're seeing 3/4 essentially being deterred by that. They don't like what they see in terms of how people are responded to once they've reported, and that starts to put them off. And less than a quarter of coaches and athletes felt the public reaction to individuals who have reported doping in sport would also encourage them. So obviously they're seeing what happens to people who report, and it's a huge deterrent essentially. So that's the end of the data, and I just want to leave it with this quote really. Doing the right thing is not necessarily as simple as I'll just report that. And I think that is really beginning to be acknowledged in the work of organisations such as UK Anti-Doping, which is great to see. The behaviour of reporting is certainly driven by a complicated interaction between an individual and their environment. And if we want to encourage reporting behaviours, we really must ensure that we address the full range of factors. So capability, opportunity, and motivation. And I guess this is just a quick summary of how we think that can be achieved. So this diagram here, developed by my wonderful colleague, Professor Sue Backhouse, just shows how the capability, opportunity, and motivation model actually sits within a broader behaviour change framework. And the wonderful thing about that is that it gives us really clear guidance on what should be done to address each element of the influencing factors. So for us, just as some examples, the first step in the process of encouraging reporting is to ensure people understand what that entails. So education at the top of this wheel here is a go-to for us. We can increase knowledge of how, what, and why to report. And then we can kind of enhance some training around that. So training down the bottom of the wheel, we can actually show people how to do that. So we can, do online courses, webinars where we load up the reporting platforms, we enter in the information, we show people and demonstrate how it's done, give them the chance to practice. That's a first step for us. That's the kind of foundation of it all. But really, there are some bigger issues at play, and we need to address the culture around speaking up, the stigma around speaking up, the social side of speaking up. So, we need things like persuasion that's up on the top right there. We need to change the way we frame this. And I think that's something that you've kind of done well with the It Takes a Team approach. This is a collective responsibility. I think that's a great way to approach it. It's certainly something that we recommended. But it's important I suppose with this is that there are still some negatives potentially as to how reporting plays out. So I think we also need to ensure that the support is in place. So there needs to be, up on the top left there, we've got environmental restructuring. That means changing the resource, changing the support in the environment. And just as one example of that, we've got that, you know, professional support is needed for people who experience the reporting process. So that's from me. Thank you so much. I hope you found that helpful. And I'll hand back to James.
Cool. Thank you, Laurie. So that is the sort of academic underpinning of what we are trying to build and address here. So I'm now going to give sort of more the operational side again, but just bear in mind this has all been influenced by the various different aspects that were brought up in the research. So since the inception of Protect Your Sport, we've seen a year-on-year increase in the number of reports received. 2020 figures are low because I already mentioned it didn't release in November of that year. And the 2023 figures were pulled, you know, this side of the new year. So we're expecting that number to rise this year as well. I've added a trend line to sort of demonstrate the kind of healthy growth we'd like to see over the next few years. But in all, an increase in reports year on year shows that the platform is growing, more people are becoming aware of it and are trusting in the platform and are happy to send information to us at UKAD. This is a slide on the level of national level athlete reporting specifically. So we're seeing an increase in reports year on year, which is fantastic. And this is achieved through a variety of factors, including the great comms program we have, ourselves going to conferences, doing webinars such as this, promoting it in person and getting Protect Your Sport out there in the sporting landscape. However, we would like to reach our pool of national level athletes more than we currently do. The majority of our testing is conducted on national level athletes, but quite often the reporting doesn't form the basis of a fair chunk of our reports. And this is where you can help by spreading the message of Protect Your Sport to be able to reach a wider audience within your sports. And just to find out how can you help. So if you're involved in educating, training, etc., building Protect Your Sport into education sessions in front of the athletes is really, really great. Furthermore, as we've already mentioned, anybody can report through Protect Your Sport. You don't have to just be an athlete. You don't even have to be an athlete support personnel. Anything can be reported to us through these channels. We have Protect Your Sport resources available on the Protect Your Sport webpage, and these are various graphics and images that can go on sports pages, websites, social media, etc. And these are available from our comms team. And finally, I'd just sort of like to wrap up with a thank you and some key points. So if anyone comes to you and is unsure where to report, simply telling them to search for Protect Your Sport will take them to the correct Protect Your Sport page, and it will come through to us. All reports are confidential. No one will know you have reported. And every bit of information that we receive is assessed and researched, no matter how small it may seem as well. You may be adding a vital piece of information to a much, much bigger puzzle that we're already trying to solve. And finally, it does take a team. We can't do this on our own. We're looking to protect sport as a whole, and that requires a team effort to be able to do so. So that is the end of the presentation. We're going to field any questions that we have. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Emma Fallows, who will assist in running the question session.
Thank you, James, and thank you both for those presentations. So we're going to jump straight into the questions now that have been provided throughout the session. So the first one, I think possibly for you, James, says the athletes I work with are much more confident in telling me and leaving their concerns with me to raise, not just in relation to doping. But can I, as a physio, take this information and share it with UKAD?
Yeah, of course. If your athletes are confident, then great, they can come forward. But if it's something that people are nervous to report, if they're worried about, their own careers, etc., which was brought up in the barriers that we've discussed today, if you're comfortable, then yeah, we're more than welcome any information through that medium in any way that you're able to. So yeah, secondhand information is still information. So you can see Laurie might have something to add on that one.
Hi, I was just going to support what you said. The research shows, not just ours, but other research, that it's quite common that people prefer to tell somebody else first rather than go into the official channels. And especially the coach is raised a lot from the athlete's perspective. So it might be worth just organisations thinking about upskilling the athlete support network so that if they are approached with those pieces of information, they know if they're able to do something with it and what that might look like. Because a lot of the time we do focus our efforts on the athlete and we maybe don't ready everybody else for what could happen as well. So yeah, I think what you explained was perfect, and it's really worth thinking about the athlete support personnel group and preparing them.
Yeah, and I think athletes might just want to confide in that figure in their sporting area that they do trust in that way. So as long as then you're comfortable coming to us with that information, we would really value it as well. So
thank you. And another one that's come through says, how do you work out if someone is whistleblowing out of perhaps a personal dislike or rivalry rather than evidence? So probably a question for both of you. I don't know whether you get much of that, James, that you've seen in the past. And Dr. Patterson, is that something that was perhaps investigated in your research?
Without any further, suspicions around various things, you have to take every piece of information at face value. So yeah, it's quite often we won't necessarily know or anything. But I guess, if it results in a test, athletes expect to be tested, especially at our top sort of level. So yeah, we take all information as face value and just go from there. So it's not always easy to sort of determine between that. So
yeah,
no?
From our perspective, it's interesting, this idea, because we initially used to investigate differences between opponents and teammates in terms of whether you would report or not. And interestingly, we ended up moving away from that because what seems to be the driver is whether you're close to a person or not. So obviously you can be close to some opponents and not close to some teammates. So there's really this factor of kind of loyalty that comes into play. So I think that's probably one of the factors, rather than reporting on your competitor because there's a hidden agenda potentially. We haven't seen that, but we have seen not wanting to report on people that we're close to and being more open to report about people that we're not close to, because there's not that concern about damaging the relationship, and you would prefer to potentially talk to the person you're close to because you'd feel able to before reporting. It's not saying that people don't eventually report on someone they're close to, but they normally try another course of action first, which is to speak to them directly.
Thank you. And also, when an athlete has followed the guidelines to report something but still doesn't trust the process, what advice can you offer to try and instill that trust? I think that might be one for you, Dr. Patterson.
That's very difficult, isn't it? I think that the things we've heard is that reassurance comes from transparency a lot of the time. A lack of trust normally comes from when we don't know. So our minds run away with us. So if there's that transparency from the organisation handling the report in terms of it's something's being acted upon, and progress being kind of reported on, then that definitely helps in terms of alleviating some of that, I suppose, doubt, I don't know if you want to call it, or distrust. So yeah, I think that's the only thing we've really come across so far, is open communication is pivotal.
I think just to build on that from sort of our perspective is, I just showed the number of reports we receive year on year. And, you know, the sources of those information aren't known to anyone. You know, we're really hot on confidentiality. Everything that comes through to us is confidential. You know, if they come through to us on an email, we may know who they are, but if they go through the other channels and they can remain completely anonymous, then, you know, that confidentiality side of it is something we really, really do work on, and sort of really want to hit home that, you know, when you come to us, it is in complete confidentiality. You can trust that process. But beyond that, we are constantly trying to evolve and grow the platform to be able to get more trust such as this. But, you know, we're seeing more and more reports and still no idea externally who is coming to us. So, you know, that confidentiality is really important.
Thank you. And James, do you have sight of which of the 3 Protect Your Sport channels receive the most messages?
I don't have actual figures on me right now, but I guess in some aspects they do mirror the barriers in some aspects. You know, we get a lot of anonymous reporting through forms over sort of telephone contact, and that may just be through people's own barriers of, oh, well, they might know it's me, I want to go anonymously in that aspect. So yeah, but I don't have the exact figures, but we do receive through all 3 different mediums, and have done since its inception. So yeah, I'm afraid I don't have those actual numbers, but yeah.
Thank you. And Dr. Patterson, in terms of providing professional support to whistleblowers, someone's asked, are we talking about sports psychologists here, and is there a process or opportunity in place yet?
Well, UKAD tell me if they are thinking of developing some sort of support. To my knowledge, I'm not aware of specific support just yet. One of our recommendations in the report to WADA back in 2019 was an ombudsman, which, as we know, has now come to fruition. So it is potentially perhaps something that they're considering housing within that service. And in terms of what that looks like, certainly counselling was mentioned. Now, I don't know if sport and exercise psychology would be the right profession to handle that. I think it depends the level of you know, trauma and emotional disruption that the person is experiencing. It may be beyond what is professionally within the standard of a sport and exercise psychologist. It might be more clinical. So I think that's probably something to be determined by whomever develops the support service.
Thank you. It's another question here we've had probably for you, James. It's understandable that whistleblowers want feedback on progress. To what extent can you comply with this? I think you're on mute, James, sorry.
Yeah, so when they come straight to us, there is a automated response, you know, thank you for your information, we'll actively look into this. What we can't do is reveal any operational plan, you know, just in case of any advance notice, and that sort of worries. When it comes through to us anonymously, we can't go back to the source in any way. But when it does come through to our email, we do try and keep the source on board, thank them personally for the information. But yeah, I think that being in contact with the sources is something that we've identified as something to really work on in the future through this Desire Code project that I've mentioned as well. So yeah, we do try where we can, and we're working on this area as well. But yeah, there is sort of an automated response at the moment, and you know, at times they will get personalised assistance as well. So.
And Dr. Patterson, a question came in during your presentation, which says, can you say a bit more about what people mean by damaging relationships out of sport? Who and how? And do you have any more detail on this?
Yeah, I do. I mean, basically what they're talking about there is the fact that this impacts everyone. So if they become a whistleblower, if we like to use that term, they are under heavy scrutiny, and there's a big reaction if that becomes known publicly that they've reported, and that has an impact on people close to them, in the way that they are treated, in terms of obviously there's negativity around that person. Obviously that's not nice to see. If that's your husband or daughter, whomever that's close to you, you don't want to see them being publicly harassed in that way. But also, let's imagine they are harassing you. It might impact on your actual day-to-day life, because there might be people, media around following you or whatever. And also, if your partner is suffering, you know, if they have anxiety, if they are low because of all of this, that also is then going to impact your life as well. So they're the kind of examples that we've heard in terms of how it might go beyond the person who reports.
Thank you. James, one for you. You probably can't say specifically, but even without naming the sport, do you get most reports from a particular sport, or is it spread across multiple disciplines?
Yeah, I'm afraid that's something I probably can't answer at this point. And again, that's purely down to confidentiality, etc. Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay, thank you. And another question actually for you, James, is do you accept reports from amateurs and recreational levels?
Yeah, of course. So we cover all sport in the UK at every level, and we'll action as appropriate. So yeah, every level. It's not just national level athletes. The reason I did hit on that in the presentation though was because we'd like a bit, you know, a lot of more reach around national level athletes. But yeah, any level of sport can come to us with any concerns.
Thank you. And Dr. Patterson, it might be harder to report on teammates or maybe even rival teams. Therefore, do you find that most reports will likely come from an individual participant sport rather than team sports? Do you have any kind of stats or findings on team versus individual types of sports reporting?
I don't have any stats, but there is one qualitative study that looked at this. So it was a colleague of mine back in 2014. It's one of the first papers that was published in an academic sense on this. And they looked at rugby league and track and field athletes, and they found that the track and field would report most likely. But rugby league, not a single player they interviewed would report because of, well, they termed it a code of silence, but essentially we're talking about loyalty. So they didn't want to harm people that they are in a small community with. And there was a concern there, as well as obviously harming that individual who they may have a relationship with, because they termed rugby league as a small community in the UK. It's obviously kind of geographically dense to the north. They said it would be difficult because you may transfer to another club at some point within your career and be playing alongside this person. And they felt like that was not something they ever wanted to kind of experience. So yes, there are some differences that have been illustrated in the past, but it's something that really hasn't been investigated widely in terms of sport difference.
Thank you very much. I think that brings us to the end of the Q&A and to the end of today's Clean Sport Connect session. So thank you to both our speakers and to all of you for joining us. As a reminder, this session was recorded and will be shared with delegates later this month and on UK Anti-Doping's digital channels. Our next Clean Sport Connect webinar is on the 24th of January at 1 p.m. with the subject being Ready, Steady, Go, Get 100% Moi for Paris. It will include presentations from our education and communications team on UK Anti-Doping's Major Games Education Programme for Paris 2024. So we hope to see you all then, and thank you once again for joining us today. Bye for now.